them is by repeating them and using them and using them and using them. Whereas the instinct of the left has always been to, well, sit down and argue with me and we'll have a rational debate out of these things and lots and lots of rational stuff. What that does is a terrible job framing-wise, but it does a very, very good, but repetitiveness, it does a good job for framing. That's why the right campaigns in that way. It's because they've been using these things for a long time. Metaphor is very important as frames. Again, basket case, Africa is basket case. You know, Tony Blair did us no favours when in 2001 he said Africa is a scar on our conscience. Africa is basket case. From a framing perspective, all he did was kind of reaffirm what people already thought, but he attached Africa's basket case. What else do you describe as a basket case? Basket case is usually a person, and usually it's because they're crazy. You're attaching Africa as one blob, almost like Africa as a person, and they're crazy. So the implications that are going on in your mind, when you read the word basket case, the frame that's pulled up in you is subconsciously about humans, it's about craziness, and you're attaching the two concepts. Okay. So, last bit of theory, bear with me. I see matter still as the story. Frames come at two levels. There is surface frames, which are essentially the ones I just showed you, which are words and meanings, at their vocal, visible level. They're very important. But in order for those surface frames to work, they have to rely on your worldview, how you believe the world works. And those are sometimes referred to as deep frames. And this is a quote from Dóchas. So these deep frames are the most basic frames that constitute a moral worldview or a political philosophy. Deep frames define your common sense. Without deep frames, there is nothing for surface frames to hang on to. Slogans don't make sense without there being a deep frame for them to connect to. This is what the Republicans were doing with tax relief. They were embedding a deep frame about taxes bad. And they did it through repetition of surface frames. And if I said to you the word tax doctor, that would make sense. You know, suddenly go, what does that mean? And when tax relief was first used, it would have had that same reaction with people. But repetition, it becomes, well, tax is obviously bad. It's subconscious, and you need to think about it. And so tax is bad is like the deep frame, and tax relief is a surface frame. Okay. So what we did, we got a set of NGO campaign and communications people together, and we sat them in a room for 2 hours. We linked them up to a frames analyst, somebody who works for Lakoff in the States, and we asked them to talk about, for 2 full hours, which obviously NGO people are very shy and retiring, they can't possibly talk for 2 hours. What defines the development debate in the UK? Not what do you think of it, but what defines the development? What are the characteristics of the development debate in the UK? And we got the frames analyst to listen and start to pull out what he heard as the deep frames and the surface frames that seem to populate through our issue. And these are the deep frames that he came up with. These actually work in kind of opposing pairs. It's not black and white. Like the values, I don't want anyone to think we were saying this is simplistic or black and white, but it helps your ability to put them into practice. There is a degree of contrast between them. They always kind of come in pairs. Individual interest and shared prosperity. You either believe in one or you believe in the other. It's a simple way of, it's too simplistic for the academics, but it helps us for both. So these are the deep frames. There's in the report, I haven't got the definitions really, but in the Defining Frames report, there are definitions of each of these. I want to pull out 2 particularly. One is a, oh, we've moved it, that's because that one, free market. That one was termed free market. Brought the frame up. No, okay, I'll forget that one. Don't think of the free market. Moral order. This is the one I want to talk about because this one is so relevant to us. And this is some people, some psychologists refer to this as an ancient frame because it is very, very deep in our subconscious of all human beings. The moral order says hierarchies exist for a moral purpose. Those who are on the bottom of a hierarchy are morally inferior to those who are on the top of a hierarchy. There is a moral dynamic to why hierarchies exist. Now, we can't stop feeling that. That is very deeply embedded in us. But how we apply it and what sort of hierarchies we create with our communications and our campaigns and our education work is critically important, because they have a natural home in your brain. And if you suggest a hierarchy exists, people will readily accept it. So this becomes deeply problematic when we start to think about, in the past, for example, it's always been God above man, man above woman, white above black, straight above gay, rich above poor. There's a moral equivalence in the hierarchy. Now, if we in any way suggest that there is a moral hierarchy between riches and poverty, that somehow those people who are rich for some moral purpose because they deserve it for some reason, and therefore those who are poor are undeserving, this is clearly very, very problematic territory for us. And it's something that we've been talking about for 20, 30 years. We've been trying to get away from this narrative about the undeserving poor. This is not the fact that we don't like this is not a revelation. The fact that the use of the moral order might still be prevalent in all of our communications, using rich at the top, poor at the bottom, should be deeply, deeply worrying to us and should give us a moment of pause, because I doubt there's anyone in this room who believes that poverty is some moral comment on your worth as a human being. But it's a very, very dominant one in the human psyche, so we must treat it with extreme caution, because the slightest inclination towards that, people will just accept it. It is deeply embedded into our life. Now, what we're not saying is there is no such thing as morality, or that some people are better than others and in moral terms, or that there are no things as hierarchies. Of course there are. We're not asking for utopia, we're not asking for anarchy, we're not asking for completely flat structures. But we are saying, be very, very careful of that one, because people are very susceptible to it. And the opposite of that, when we talk about human networks. So we suggest that if we are building up communications, we should stray away from that and into this. And if we should stray away from elite governance, which says the world is quite rightly run by people who are specialists. And I have no say, or the average person shouldn't get involved in governance. It should be left to the elite and the specialists. Again, slightly simplistic, there's better, fuller definitions in the report. And the comparative one is participatory democracy. So if you go back to the surface frames point about if you tap something, if you activate it, you strengthen it, then you want to stay away from activating anything that suggests it is right that there is an elite governance, and constantly talk about in the frames of participatory democracy. Stay away from moral order, talk about narratives. Okay. This is a bit, and this is where we start to really hit the rubber against the road, because when we and this needs to be tested, this is all kind of theoretical knowledge as well. When we pulled up from the problematic deep frames and said which of our surface frames are working on using those deep frames that are problematic, we came up with these as just 5 little words. Now, OXFAM is an international aid and development charity that does campaigns. Is in a bit of a sticky wicket. So that's just to suggest to you that it's riddled through our language. And actually every time we use words like this, we are inadvertently and subconsciously referring to that moral order. We are using the word aid, and actually later there's a lot to say about development. But how scary is this? When we use the word development, we are reinforcing the idea that poor people are less moral than rich people. Quick, look at that last press release. And charity, and Jim and I were having a quick conversation at the beginning, the concept of charity. Now this is a complicated one and it needs a lot more pulling apart, so I don't want to suggest that we just drop any of these tomorrow. But the concept of charity is problematic, because charity relies on that, the dominant frame for charity in most Western cultures, it seems, is one of that powerful giver, lucky or grateful receiver to have my scraps off my table type thing. And so every time we refer to that, we reinforce and we validate that as the worldview. Campaigns, again, campaigns because the way that we use campaigns, there's nothing wrong with the word campaigns, of course there is, but the way we use it and the construct, the dominant understanding of campaigns is a very didactic one. And this is something that we've done we've helped construct here. It's part of the elite governance problem, that we tell you what to do because we are the experts, you are the cannon fodder who go up and shout to your MP for us using our words. It's soaked in that idea that there is the great NGOs almost, or that the world should run by some people telling everybody else what to do. So we've got to come up. One of the things is the implication of this is we come up with new words. Okay. Implications for our last bit. Okay. So the first thing, and this was an insight from WWF, their chief executive, who realised that the very first thing you've got to do, if this makes sense to you, if it doesn't, it doesn't, but if it does, and you're interested in it, the first barrier to cross is that this is not a communications challenge. This is not a campaigning challenge. This is a whole organisation challenge. If you think from OXFAM's perspective, our campaigns, we have the biggest campaigns department of any in the UK, in GP. They made a mess with my job title. I know, they call them UK campaign. But the footprint, the voice of OXFAM in the UK is much more about our shops and our fundraising than it is about our campaign. So we can't change any frames just through our campaigns, we're not big enough. You have to be thinking about it across your organisation. The basic strategy is you need to nurture the helpful values. Those values that the evidence suggests leads to behaviours that are more consistent with the behaviours that we are trying to encourage. And you need to promote those positive frames. At the same time, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1. That instills confidence in me, doesn't it? You need to challenge the unhelpful values. So just as you're nurturing the helpful, you need to challenge the unhelpful values. You need to break, weaken, or replace those frames that are either inaccurate, and there's a lot of just inaccuracy in some of people's understandings of poverty, or are actively toxic. That sense of the undeserving poor, as I would say, is toxic. It's not just inaccurate, it's quite corrosive. You need to manage the trade-offs. This isn't easy, and it's not going to be quick, because an awful lot of what we do is built up, and we do it because it works. At a certain level, our fundraising models work.